Hey, well, thank you for joining us on X Garage once again today. My name is Jake the Snake. We got a really wonderful guest here today, Nathan Fisher, who grew up in the Watchtower Church, or in a Jehovah's Witness church. And he's here to tell us a little bit about his testimony and what it's like going from there to coming to Christ. And yeah, I'm very excited to hear your testimony. Hey, how's it going, Nathan?
Going good. How are you?
Doing all right. That he like to be called just a full name, Nathan, or Nate, or Fisher, or
Nathan, either one works fine.
Awesome. Well, let's just kind of get right into it. I'd love to hear a little bit about what it was like growing up as a kid and into your younger years as a teenager. I know you spent a lot of time studying JW dogma growing up and being reared that way. So I'd love to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I actually was born into the Jehovah's Witnesses, raised as a third generation Jehovah's Witness. My great grandmother had contact with the Jehovah's Witnesses. They would come by her house, I believe, back in the 1930s or 40s, and they were playing the phonograph machine to her at the door, which had things like they had different various records and stuff that they could play with messages. So they weren't actually using as much the Watchtower and the Awake magazines then. And she didn't really convert, but she would always listen to them. And then my grandmother, when she was in her early 20s, or late 20s, actually, around 25 or 26, I think if I remember the story correctly that my parents told, they came by her house and she actually converted. And my mom was 8 years old at the time. And then later, after my grandmother had converted, my grandfather converted, and then I believe my great-grandmother followed and converted as well. So then on my dad's side, my dad's father and my grandmother over there were also Jehovah's Witnesses, so he grew up in a Jehovah's Witness home as well. In the 1960s, probably, my dad had went and served at the headquarters for Jehovah's Witnesses in Brooklyn, New York, and they call that Bethel. And that's where they used to do all the worldwide printing work. And so they printed all the magazines, all the books, all the literature, publications. And he served there for over 4 years and got a lot of training there, and then became an elder in the local congregation. Him and my mom met at a district assembly or convention at Yankee Stadium. And she wasn't actually interested in him at the time, but she wanted to correspond with someone who was in Bethel. And so she started writing him, and then they ended up later on dating and got married. When he moved back to where my mom lives at, and my grandmother, and where I grew up, and grandfather, he basically became an elder then, and then later was promoted to be in what was called at the time a presiding overseer, which is the lead elder. So they have a elder-led type church, and he was the lead elder in the church. So I grew up the son of the lead elder in the church.
Yeah. Would that be like equivalent to like a pastor, or is it a little bit higher, do you say?
I would say it would be like senior pastor role, maybe.
Okay.
So, in a lot of our churches, we have senior pastors and then associate pastors. I would say it would probably be senior pastor role, but was he the one doing all of the, given all of the instruction from the platform? No, he shared the role, but they did travel him around quite a bit.
Was he a traveling overseer type?
No, but we do know someone who actually became a traveling overseer eventually. But my dad would go around the area about once a month. They would send him to another congregation, and he would give a talk there. They call them talks, not sermons. And he would give a talk there, and so we would go visit. And I got to meet some friends and stuff as we would go around and visit as places. But as a kid, I was getting the top-notch, if you will, Jehovah's Witness training. They were priming me to be the best Jehovah's Witness I could possibly be, to go to Bethel, to become a traveling overseer, possibly, like you just mentioned. Just as far as I could go in the organization, and that was what they were priming me to do from childhood on.
Yeah, is that kind of looked at as a to be a part of that Bethel, or being within that group? It's doing a lot of, it sounds like the publication, the theology. Is it seen within the assemblies to be a kind of a place that's looked up to, like a spiritual elitistic kind of, man, if I could just have contact with these folks here, this is good?
Yeah. So if you think about it, the closer that you are to the leadership and the top, the governing body, the closer in that proximity with other anointed people, as they say, 144,000. There's a lot up in that area that are supposedly in Bethel and also in the New York and Pennsylvania area. So to be just affiliated in that area does carry quite a bit of weight. And I know there was a gentleman that came back from serving at Bethel after he got married to someone in our congregation, and everybody kind of looked at him as being this spiritual giant in the Jehovah's Witnesses, as if he was highly trained and someone to look up to and all that.
Right. Go ahead.
In my interaction with Jehovah's Witness, they put a lot of weight on being able to say what the scholars say. When they're saying that, is that most of what they're referring to is back east and the people that get that kind of training? They're obviously not referring to evangelical scholars or atheistic scholars.
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say that if you're talking about quotes from their publications, a lot of times they will use actual scholars that they will use their quotes out of context to fit whatever it is they're trying to prove. As far as the governing body goes, obviously the governing bodies, the brothers that they call them governing body, they're the people in the organization that are of the anointed and supposedly directly chosen by Jehovah God to fit that role and be in that. And they also are supposed to be the ones that God's Holy Spirit, which they consider his active force, is influencing and telling kind of which way the doctrine's going, whether there's a new doctrine change, things like that. So they're definitely ones that make the rules kind of, and also as far as the doctrine goes, they would be the ones that would say, hey, we received new light, as they call it. And this doctrine that we used to teach is now going to change. And that's happened multiple times throughout their history.
When I hear that, new light, I think that's scary right there. Considering the word is the light, and so you're getting this, like you're saying, connecting it with the Spirit, empowering, getting new revelation or something that's more insightful than what we have clearly revealed in the Word.
Well, in the early church, there was quite a bit of people that claimed to have special revelation from the Gnostic movement.
Oh yes. This, and like you said, this continues in many streams of quote unquote Christian different denominations, particularly with the Pentecostalism, has a hard time trying to separate how they are speaking revelatory without being scripture. So these are definitely issues that go beyond the Watchtower for sure.
Yeah, I think the Mormons also have the same kind of structure going on as well. The new light that is basically, I mean, since I was a child and was in there, I can remember multiple times when doctrines changed or flip-flopped or they came out with new light. And what they would always do is they would announce it at like a convention. And so they'd get everybody in the crowd kind of pumped up. They'd release a new book, and everybody would just be so excited because there's this new information from Jehovah that's been passed down from the governing body down to the rank and file. And they would get super excited. And I just remember my parents would get so overwhelmed and excited and my grandmother especially, because she was quite by far the best Jehovah's Witness I've ever seen, as far as like being in line with everything that they taught and living the Jehovah's Witness life. She would sometimes sit in the hotel when we had been at a convention all day and I was ready to go to the pool and play with other friends at the hotel. She would sit in the hotel and read that entire book that night.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just how how it was, right?
Yeah, and it goes back to that theology of the anointed class, the slave class, or whatever it's called again, and where I know that there's like 2 or 3 terms I heard when I was studying about it, but that anointed class is that they really, that's kind of that indicative that this is that class that is a part of that, if I'm correct me if not, that will be ruling in the millennial kingdom, shepherding, if you will, or teaching the rest of humanity the light of God's word. Is that correct?
That's very close, yeah. So the anointed class actually would be representative of the entire 144,000 number, which is the only amount of people that they believe that will go to heaven. It's taken from 1 or 2 scriptures in Revelation, which I believe to be figurative. The number has a representation, but it doesn't, in my eschatology, it does not represent a literal 144,000. But that's something I've developed over time.
Yeah, I think you're in good company here with that.
Yeah. So the faithful and discreet slave, though, is the title that the governing body of anointed people has given themselves.
Yes.
That's I believe they're at eight people now that are in the faithful and discreet slave, and of course people have came and gone, died, and things like that over the years. But before they used to just have like one president, and then other members that would kind of the anointed that would kind of consult. So I think the presidency, if I remember correctly, after Judge Rutherford died, they did Franz, and then I think they had one other guy, and maybe in between, before or after, and then they started to the model of a group of men leading and being kind of co-equal, so to speak, across their leadership.
So I do want to interject here. I want to save some of this stuff for next time we have you over.
Oh yeah, sorry.
We're getting off topic.
All my questions deal with the theology, and so I keep messing that up. I apologize. But thank you for entertaining me.
Yeah. I want to hear. I want to hear a little bit more about the chronology of your childhood. I know you shared a picture a few weeks back from, I think it was your graduation day from high school, and you had some interesting things to say about there. Can you kind of walk us just from early childhood, maybe just briefly? Was it enjoyable? Was there moments where it felt like there was fear kind of pushed in there because of their dogma, stuff like that? I just kind of want to hear what your life story has been.
So when I was really young, from about right before I went to grade school, I skipped kindergarten. My mom actually thought that I was not, that I didn't need to go to kindergarten. So she actually skipped me a grade and put me directly in first grade. But before that, I lived what I thought to be a pretty normal life. We went out in the field ministry, which is their door-to-door preaching work. And we had met some nasty people here and there at the doors. And I had heard some stuff like that, that they were being not nice to my dad and my mom when they would come to the door. But everything pretty much was normal. My parents taught me the Bible, and I thought that they were teaching me correct. And I had a good relationship with my grandmother, my grandfather, my cousin, that is actually my aunt's son on my dad's side, and my grandmother and grandfather over there, and my parents, and it was great. So pretty normal. But then when you get to school, that's when you start to realize that you're not normal, that you're different. Because the minute that you go to school, your parents send you, at least back when I was growing up in the 80s, they send you with a actual brochure called School in Jehovah's Witnesses. And they may still have a copy of that circulating around, maybe updated and revised. But it basically is a rule book for all of your teachers. what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot participate in. And what that did was a lot of the teachers already were familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses as far as them being a cult and having other feelings towards Jehovah's Witnesses. So I didn't really get a whole lot of sympathy from some of the teachers, and then other teachers kind of just felt bad for me. But you start sitting out at a birthday celebration at school. You sit out at the when they're decorating Easter eggs. You sit out when they're doing a Halloween party or a Christmas party or anything like that, and you're just completely isolated, and everyone in the class knows that you're sitting out because you're that weird guy. And now I don't necessarily agree with all of those celebrations. Halloween I have issues with, and I have issues with decorating eggs and Easter bunny and things like that, but we won't go into that. But the point is you're not the same as everyone else. Mm-hmm. And then from there, you're encouraged as a child to stand firm for Jehovah, to stand up for your beliefs. And so in standing up for your beliefs, once you get picked on and messed with enough, you start getting pretty snarky and sarcastic with the other kids, and then they automatically hate you more or dislike you more. So I got bullied a lot when I was in school, and I was also a year behind, so I was a little bit of a smaller guy. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, now I'm not so small. My wife did a really good job of fattening me up, but she cooks really good. But yeah, so
that's a good deal
for me, maybe not for her.
So what I want to know is, what did your training look like as far as like the preparatory work leading up to like them prepping you to become like a leader in the church?
So because my dad was an elder, we held weekly Bible study. He ran a weekly Bible study with a small group. He was preparing for parts on the Thursday. They call them parts, but it's when you get up and give a talk, as they say, a sermon. Preparing for sermons on Thursday nights. Immediately when I got to, I think I was around 8 years old, they enrolled me as what's called an unbaptized publisher. And that's when you can start going door to door and actually count field service time.
Wow.
And what field service time basically is there is a ministry overseer, a public ministry overseer, and everyone reports their time and what they have sold, because we actually sold literature at the time with the actual fee that they sold it at, the price they sold it at, and turn it into him. And then he reports those hours up to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and all the congregations are doing this. Now, when Jimmy Swaggart had his kind of issue with his little scandal with taxes and stuff, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society got kind of wise to it and learned from that. And so they switched their model to, if you would like to donate to the worldwide preaching work, you can make a small monetary donation. So that got them to keep their 501(c), I believe, standing is what it is, and all of that. But basically, I was enrolled in that. And so I started having to do, I think it's a mandatory of 10 hours a month that you have to do to keep in good standing. So that's a couple Saturdays a week, or a couple Saturdays a month, and maybe a Sunday afternoon after a meeting, that you go out into field service and you're knocking on doors. And of course, they started training me how to talk to people. So on Thursday nights, we had what was called the Theocratic Ministry School. The Theocratic Ministry School is basically the Jehovah's Witness in-house congregation training seminars. And they teach you how to talk to people. You give small talks that are 5 minutes or 8 minutes from the podium, training you how to kind of basically be an elder that could talk, or a ministerial servant that could give a sermon, even though they don't use that word. And then you do mock settings. They have a couple mock settings where they actually have people that are playing the role of someone answering a Jehovah's Witness at the door and raising an objection, or, receiving it and making a return. They call it a return visit when they come back, or accepting a home Bible study. So they're training this. And this is where I believe I think it was Dr. White. He actually said, they're spending more time.
White, yeah.
Yeah, more time to train to talk to you than we are to them whenever they come to our door, and it's true. So then my dad also had private Bible study with me and my mom, and he also had a private Bible study quite often with just me.
Mhm.
So it was quite a lot of things. So we would have an hour. They called them a book study on Monday or Tuesday night. It would switch sometimes depending on the season and whose house it was at. That was in a small group type thing. Then we would have the Thursday night meeting, which was 2 hours and ended around 9:15 or 9:20. You get home around 10 o'clock at night. And then they had the Sunday meeting, which was generally in the morning, and it was about 2 hours. There was a public talk, which a traveling speaker, such as what I told you about with my dad, would come from another congregation and give the talk. And then you would have the Watchtower study. Now, the Watchtower study is even more training because the Watchtower study is generally articles that are specifically written to teach Jehovah's Witness doctrine to the congregation. And they're written in such a way that there's a question and answer portion that involves the audience. So a person will read a couple paragraphs. One of the elders, generally, or a ministerial servant, which is their form of like a deacon, will read the article from the platform, and then they will ask the questions. And the way that it's written in such a way that the question that they want you to memorize and commit to your memory as doctrine is right there embedded in the paragraphs. And so you answer that specifically, you don't deviate from it. And that's just what people do that are involved in that. So I was all the time, involved in these various meetings and stuff, because my parents were considered to be, very high up and still are in the Jehovah's Witness church.
So obviously had a lot of training, lots of, that's a lot of hours to spend growing up. At least got to give them props for their dedication.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through a little bit, maybe through more of like, say, high school? Did you have a point, and I don't know how old you were when you converted, but can you kind of walk us through maybe high school and then when some of these ideas started getting challenged?
Yeah, sure. So I just remember getting bullied a lot and just really picked on a lot in grade school. And so around sixth grade, the end of sixth grade, my mom just took me out of school. And she started homeschooling me. Sorry. And so the situation with that is at the time, the Jehovah's Witnesses, at least in my area, had started kind of latching on to some homeschool programs that were being offered. And so they just pulled me out. And my mom didn't really have any good training to be a teacher. So my schoolwork kind of suffered, and I ended up just kind of teaching myself. And so at the time, we had what was called the CAT test where I was growing up that you would have administered by the state that said that you were able to pass that grade. And I would just go in and take those tests and pass them. But as far as the schoolwork, I mean, I had the books and I would be studying them, but it was not the type of high school education that I would have desired. So around probably, I think it was about 15 and a half, 16, I enrolled at the local community college for an adult high school program and just got my diploma from there. And I finished it up in about 6 or 7 months and graduated at like 16 and a half, which was the picture I believe that you guys were referring to earlier. But in between that time, there was a lot of things going on in my life. So a little bit of a bad thing that really, really shaped and changed my life and hurt me quite a bit was I was actually sexually abused by a non-immediate family member for a couple of years from between like the ages of 8 and 10, almost 11. And
so was this related to your time in the church, or was this external to the church?
Well, this person was actually a Jehovah's Witness, but they were family, and it had nothing to do with kind of the scandal that you hear now. However, there was some small amount of cover up involved, but it didn't come out until I was like 18 years old. I finally told my parents what had happened, but that's a different story. But during that time period, you have to understand that Jehovah's Witnesses are a doomsday cult. the end of the world is coming is all you ever hear as a kid. So from the minute that you get to the age, and I would say the age probably is around 9 or 10, that you start to really begin to realize that you have sins and that things that you do that Jehovah would judge you for it, then you start to have that fear as well of the doomsday aspect of, if Armageddon comes tomorrow, did I do enough work for Jehovah? Did I backtalk my parents? And because I backtalk my parents, I'm going to be, because I know a lot of Christian parents do this too. They'll make a little joke once in a while about, the nation of Israel and disrespectful kids, and then they'll kind of giggle and chuckle about it, and that's fine if you want to joke like that. But whenever it's kind of the end of the world coming around the corner, anytime Jehovah's going to judge you for the last thing you did, those type of things are kind of scary to a kid. And so then you pair that with the sexual abuse that I experienced, and the person telling me that, if I told anybody that we would both get kicked out and disfellowshipped and all of that stuff, even though I wasn't even baptized, I didn't know any better. I was in constant fear every time they would say anything from the platform, or at an assembly, or I read anything in a watchtower or at a Bible study or anything about the end of the world coming soon, because I didn't know what would happen to me. And I blamed myself for what was happening to me that wasn't my fault. And then, of course, any other sin that I thought I had was weighing upon me, and I thought that if the end of the world came, I would get judged for it. So it was rough.
No, it's really, really hard. I mean, I know I've experienced similar things in my life concerning that. So how did you get out of that? How did that lead you into the out of your high school years?
But before we get there, actually, we got 10 minutes left before we have to wrap up this episode based on Zoom time restrictions, because we use the #free account.
Okay. Yeah, let's go with the baptism.
Okay.
And then after that, let's end this episode, and we'll pick up another one if that works for you guys.
Yeah, that works for me. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.